What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of my Warhammer 40k homebrew series, in which I am currently talking about my homebrew loyalist Space Marine chapter, the High Slayer Guard. Last time we talked about their equipment, and today we are going to be talking about the gene flaw, very briefly at the beginning, at least. Then I want to move on to talking about the history of the chapter, because I think really I can't make a full video breaking down the gene flaw, but I don't think I could make a short doing it, so we're going to do it this way where the gene flaw takes up, I don't know, 2-3 minutes at the beginning, then I'll talk about the history of the chapter in general. We'll run through major events from founding to current era, and the next episode, I think we'll probably do notable characters in more detail. I think that's going to be what the next thing is. Don't hold me to that, but that's what's planned. And as per usual, this video's actual video part consists of a mixture of Space Marine 2 and Dark Tide videos and clips, because I've started playing a lot of Dark Tide and I really like it, and depending on when this gets uploaded, there might actually be some Space Hulk in it at the end. I don't know. Trying to get GV to play it with me, because I've heard that it's a friends game, right? It's one of those. It's a party game. That's what it is. But yeah, get on with the video. The hollow, or the hollowing, is the genetic flaw of the High Slayer Guard, and it functions similarly to hollowing in Dark Souls, and that's what it's named after, in fact. The way it works is that once a Space Marine suffers such grief and despair, they will slowly lose themselves and become inhuman, and not in the transhuman way of Space Marines, but in the fact that they lose personality, ambition, want, desire, feeling, physical, and mental. Although it starts with physical, with things like their fingers going numb, their ears, nose, lips, stuff like that. Once this starts happening, essentially it's just a ticking time until it ends, though if it is caught once, like, there are only slight symptoms like the fingers being numb, eyes, nose, whatever, it can be delayed. Very commonly, it is delayed. On more rare circumstances, it can actually be stopped, though once it's started, you're almost guaranteed to eventually fall to it. Though you can get, I don't know, 100 more years of life before it happens. Once they start experiencing mental symptoms, they're gone, essentially. It's going to happen. There's no delaying it at that point. It's progressed too far. At this point, they'll start being numb, emotionless, apathetic. They won't care about human life. They won't care about their brothers' lives as much, which is that once that happens, it's a big red flag, considering they are very, very close to their brothers to an almost psychic extent. Once a Marine falls to the Hollow, they are sent to the Hollowed Company, which I think I've said was the fourth company, though that's been that was a misspeaking. And they have, much like the Death Company of the Blood Angels, just a separate company for the Hollowed, in which they are given no chapter, squad, company markings, nothing like that. They're just given bright orange armor with bright yellow eyes, and they're essentially sent on very simplistic missions, because once they fully go hollow, they have to be essentially programmed by a chaplain. They have to be fed, bathed, and essentially taken care of in all extents by chapter serfs. When they are programmed to go on missions, they can only do simple things like kill anyone who crosses that trench, kill anyone on the other side of that trench, kill anything that you see, go to this place, kill every stuff like that. Very simple stuff that mostly involves killing anything you see beyond a point or anything at all. So they're not very versatile, but the ad the advantage of using them is that they don't feel hungry, they don't feel pain, they don't feel tired. If they're on the extreme of like hunger, drowsiness, anything like that, they will start to get physical symptoms, but they will not feel anything. And they'll not be slowed by feeling tired. Like, if they go for weeks or even like a month on end without sleeping, yes, they will start to like break down essentially, like any living thing would. But they won't physically feel tired. Same with hunger. They will begin to starve. They will become malnourished, but they won't feel hungry. They won't look for food. It's it's an advantage, but it's also a drawback because if they get lost, they're just gonna fucking starve or die of dehydration, something like that. So it, there's advantages and then there's drawbacks. This is kind of delving into history a little bit, but it has to do with the flaw, is that one of the early chapter masters of the High Slayer Guard actually tried his damnedest to remove or at the very least make it much less common, and he somewhat succeeded in some ways, but most failed. um, and what he found out was no one knows really why it happens. There's no reason. Like for the Blood Angels, the reason that they have the red thirst is because they inherited a mutation from their Primarch. When it comes to the Hollow, they just don't know why they have it. They don't know why they have that gene flaw. Although the advantage to it is that they've found out one thing from it is that it is somewhat the reason that they are so heavily linked to one another, why they can essentially feel one another's thoughts, as is sometimes described. And in the Neophyte, which is a short story that I'm currently writing for it, they can become so in sync during combat that they move almost as if they were one fluid organism. And it's described as being, for your first few times, very disorienting once you come out of it, and uh, like sickening almost at times because it's just so disorienting because you've essentially become one with several other people. This is very good for combat and very good for coordination, very good for um, improvising when you have two teams that are separated because you can just know what the other people are doing or have a very, very good idea of what they are doing at least, but has the drawback of the hollow. Aside from this, the only other major thing that they've been able to learn is that individualism, stuff like the White Scars do, where, you know, hunting, cartography, painting, writing, sculpting, something can help fend it off. Same with being very close with your brothers, although that was already a thing that they had. On top of that, the only other way, and this is a very exclusive thing with chaplains, sorry, hold on, is once you become a chaplain, they erase all your memories from before you joined the chapter. So you still have all your training, you have your muscle memory, but you don't have detailed memories of your time on your homeworld. This, they don't know why. It was just kind of one of the things that Religan Frank, previous chapter master, kind of threw at the wall to see what would stick. This is one of the things that did stick, though he figured this is just going to ruin the chapter if I just implement this for everyone, so I'll just do it for chaplains since they are the ones who will typically be the ones drawing brothers out from the hollow during its early stages. I think we've covered mostly everything to do with the hollow, so we're going to move on to the actual history of the chapter now. The High Slayer Guard was a part of the 13th or Dark Founding, which was a period in which a lot of gene seed experimentation came about. It's where a lot of mixed gene seed stuff comes about, and where a lot of that general stuff happens. Where some theories about chapters that were founded using traitor gene seed came about. Now, it's up in the air about whether that's the case for the High Slayer Guard, because with recent additions to the lore, their actual lineage has been tossed up into question, though there's no actual leads that have been made, at least in universe. Although, if we're going based on what everyone still thinks, aside from the chapter master and a few of his serfs, they are successors of the Imperial Fists, which checks it for a lot of their traits. Going back to even before the chapter actually was founded, just after the Horus Heresy, an Imperial Fist named Lucius Ulaine was betrayed on the planet of Halthed, which would become a major point in the chapter's history. Major planet. The planet was an actual nice place to live, but eventually, during the Horus Heresy, it was hit by the Night Lords, and essentially they tortured, killed all the educated class, and only left the very poor. And even then, they tortured a lot of them to the point where they regressed to savages, as they were called. And all their infrastructure was destroyed, and it turned into a feral world. And because of the already harsh environment, high gravity, and a very scorching hot sun, and the fact that a lot of it's a desert, now that there was no cities, infrastructure, anything like that, feral world, where it's kind of a hell to live, but it makes a very hardy and strong people. Very good for a chapter. Lucius would be betrayed on this planet by his unit, and his greatest friend, an apothecary who was with him during the Siege of Terra, would be killed by the rest of his unit, and so he, with just a sword, and at the end, just his bare hands, would kill all of his unit, including 5 Marines. Though by the end, he would be heavily wounded and decide to burn all the bodies except for his friend. Now, after this, he would end up leading a purge of everyone on the ship which deployed him, killing anyone he even thought might be a little corrupt, including a lot of guardsmen. He killed a lot of people to make sure there was no corruption before continuing his own holy crusade against chaos during the Scouring. Moving far forward in time, because Lucius Ulaine lived hundreds of years. He lived actually about 1,000-ish years, about 1,100 years on the long end. But at the end, it's not known exactly how he died, but he was found about 100-ish years after he died. And when he was found with a stockpile of gene seed. It is up for debate what gene seed this was, though official records state it as having been Imperial Fist gene seed, and a lot of it. And he was found dead with it in a vault in a position in which he was like body blocking it. And his body was all decayed, he was torn apart, there were holes in his armor through his body, to the point where one of the investigating inquisitors literally took their fist and reached through the hole at one point, because that is how big the massive gaping hole on the right of his chest was. Not long after the discovery of this, the High Slayer Guard would be founded, and its first members would be those who served under Lucius Ulaine, who was a captain. Now, those members would certainly be Imperial Fists. That's without a doubt, they were Imperial Fists before they joined the High Slayer Guard. And they carried over a lot of Lucius Ulaine's practices, that being essentially heavy defensive, but hit like a train when you have to. So they brought over the idea of a phalanx, where you just hold your line, tire out the enemy and then just crush them was essentially their practice. Though once new Marines started coming in that were made by the gene seed found with Lucius Ulaine, that is when a lot of the chapter's more identifiable traits came out, that being bigger because they were now recruiting solely from their homeworld of Brimeld, and after a while they started recruiting from Halfed because of its importance to them, because they viewed Lucius Ulaine as their founder. So both of these planets have a higher gravity, so they make quite strong people. Also, Brimeld is a feudal world, and Halfed is a feral world, which is essentially a hellhole to live on. And their entire purpose on Halfed is to survive, breed, and then hopefully make a child that is strong enough and worthy of becoming part of the chapter. So childhood is spent almost entirely training, getting stronger, getting faster, all that. And even getting physically thicker skin, and they are very resistant to heat because of the scorching hot sun and sands. Another thing that would come up is the rank of a center. Now, an Ascenter is essentially the partner and successor to the chapter master, so that there's never any point in which there's a power vacuum or anything. There's no stress to find a new chapter master. Every chapter master has to select an Ascenter within 50 to 60 years of becoming the chapter master, and their Ascenter has to go under their tutelage, and there's some like trials that come on later, but I'm not gonna talk about those now. I'm gonna wait until I do either a video on the culture or I make another story about it. Now, the Ascender isn't just the protege and successor of the chapter master. They're not just under their tutelage. They are also a partner in both combat and practicality. They will help the chapter master with certain duties when they are uh, taken up by others, and they will lead armies and stuff like that. So the Ascenter is also looked on as a voice of authority in politics, diplomacy, and combat, though they are outranked by like mostly everyone else in the chapter master circle, like the chapter ancient. The champions can sometimes have a say over them in some circumstances, depending on how respected the Ascenter is, and the chapter master, of course, is above them. Now, these were all of Religan Frank's major things, but the next major chapter master came up around 200, 250 M41. Big jump in time, I know, but we're covering the basics and the major points in the chapter's history. And at this point, the chapter master was a man named Tenton Noln, who wasn't that notable, but around 296-ish, I believe is the date, Halfed began to get invaded by the Tyranids. But we're going to get back to that later. A majority of the chapter, including the chapter master, were off on crusade with some salamanders against the Necrons. This was in revenge of another world which they fought on, which was ambushed by Necrons, and they lost. And to preserve their honor and have revenge, essentially, they went against the Necrons. The crusade was actually going quite well, but eventually, around 341, the invasion of Halfed was so bad that the crusade had to be called off and all ships had to come back. But by the time that happened, the war was in critical condition. Millions of inhabitants of the planet were dead. A lot of future aspirants were dead, and a lot of space marines were dead. But with the return of the crusading companies and the chapter master, it was thought, oh, well, now we can fully fix this because the entire chapter is here. But the invasion just got worse and worse to the point where there were no guardsmen left on the planet. Most of the chapter serfs were dead. And the several companies were just eradicated, including the 3rd, 4th, and 8th companies. The, at the time, Apothecarian was also heavily wounded, and the High Chaplain was just killed. And the chapter master lost one of his closest friends, Prometican, who in a story ends up becoming an amnesiac, but we'll get to that later. And by later, I mean in a short story that I'm writing, but I need to actually go over and finalize. But that's not the point. By the end of the final push, which was between, it was in a valley between two big mountains, essentially they held their last stand against the final invasion force, and there were 3 main combat points. There was a group that, unbeknownst to the rest of the chapter, was on the other side of the mountain on the left when it came to where the High Slayer Guard was facing. They thought that they were all dead, but they were just over the other side of the mountain, and they had very little ammo, but they were by a depot which had jump packs, so they just essentially took the jump packs and mid-battle waging below, jumped down and killed a hive tyrant by having about 7 different marines all land on its back at once, and stabbing at it with power swords, power axes, chain swords, whatever, doing everything they could. And that entire force that came off the mountain, they all died, but they took out 3 crucial enemies. They took out a hive tyrant, which destroyed most of the Tyranid force, though they found that there was also a Neothrope out in the masses, which was killed far later. But they also killed a Carnifex and a Biovore, which lended greatly, and those that didn't land on these major enemies, they just kind of landed in the crowd and went at her, and this did change a lot because about 70 Marines fell from the sky, and 70 Marines jumping into the middle of the thing, yes, they all died, but they did damage. Then there was the main force, which included the chapter master, fighting essentially head-on against the Tyranids. And then there were 2 different strike teams that went along the edge of the mountain just across from the one which the jump pack marines came down from. And these 2 strike teams, their entire goal was to essentially set up heavy artillery and just rain hell on the mid and back lines of the Tyranid forces, and the first strike team was entirely annihilated trying to set this up, so the second one decided to abandon that mission, and they went after a Neurothrope, which, upon killing, the entire force of all the Tyranids just went into an unorganized, like, frenzy, which allowed the main High Slayer Guard force to essentially cleave through much, much better than they would otherwise. And the strike team that did this, all but 2 of them did die in the process, but they were hailed as heroes. And there was about 180 Marines left after this, but only 85 of them hadn't fallen to the Hollow. This included the Chapter Master and essentially one other captain, because the only remaining companies were the 1st, 10th, and 6th. The rest were entirely destroyed. So the chapter essentially spent its entire time for the next several hundred years trying to rebuild. Tenton Noln would lose his best friend by his own hand later, and would eventually fall to the Hollow, being the first chapter master to ever do so. I'm sorry about that voice crack. Many hundreds of years later, once the current chapter master, Pedro Alessio, came along, he actually clawed and fought his way to bring the chapter back to its former glory. And even before Primaris reinforcements, he got the chapter up into triple digits again, which was insane. And the only reason that they remained a chapter was because he made a deal with the Inquisition that is now not a thing anymore, because he essentially told the Inquisition to piss off. And this deal was that the Inquisition had full access to the Hollowed Marines with no say from the rest of the chapter. If the Inquisition wanted Hollowed Marines, they got them. And any Marines that came back to a battle barge, the Fortress Monastery, any of them that were Hollowed that actually got back, they would be shipped away to the Inquisition to essentially be their warrior slaves. When Primaris reinforcements came along, that entirely revitalized the chapter, though once the Great Rift happened and the Imperium was split in 2, that really sucked for about 40 Marines of the chapter, because during the invasion of Tolfed, as you could probably imagine, I think I mentioned this briefly earlier, the population was rocked to the point where most aspirants were killed, most viable offspring were killed, an entire hemisphere was just eradicated of all life. And now, in a space station hovering over Halthed, which slowly is descending because of some damage it took during the invasion, only 40 Marines remain in Imperium Nihilus, whereas the rest of the recovering chapter, that has pretty much fully recovered at this point, is in Imperium Sanctus. Now, the chapter in Imperium Nihilus only holds about 40 Marines and only about 4 chaplains, and those chaplains are entirely tending to the dead, because there is a tomb on Halthed that holds all the dead serfs and all the dead Astartes who died during the battle, although all the ones that were recoverable at least. Because of this, they refuse to leave Imperium Nihilus. They refuse to even attempt it, which would be a very risky attempt at that. They will not do it because they believe that it is their holy duty to tend to the bodies of the dead and to honor them by continuing to fight. Although, there has been a cult, a Gene Stealer cult, that attacked on Halthed, and nearly got into the tomb and the vault, which holds a lot of the chapter's gene seed. That's not a good, because if there's one gene stealer cult, there is likely more. So now they have not depots, but like garrisons set up to defend that tomb, that vault, and several other points along the planet, but because they're spread so thin, there's not that many of them. They can't do everything. They can't defend the whole planet. So they're just hoping that if a Gene Stealer cult comes around, it'll come somewhere that they have a good tight hold on. But as seen before, it might not be enough, but they're really hoping it will be. Now, when it comes to the current chapter master, he actually continues to foster the relationship between the High Slayer Guard and the Salamanders, and in fact, while meeting with several captains of the Salamanders on a night world, kind of meet in the middle so that they're not going to anyone's home world, so that nobody kind of feels like anyone's pressured to do anything. An invasion against that night world happened, in which it was mostly the World Eaters attacking, but the Alpha Legion, at least one of the war bands, decided, this is a good point to take advantage. Let's try and absolutely destroy two chapters' leadership, or at least shake it up a little. So they decided to try to assassinate the chapter master of the High Slayer Guard, Pedro Alessio, and the captains of the Salamanders, though this failed because Pedro Alessio is one of the greatest duelists in the chapter, if not the greatest duelist. He's not the strongest, fastest, nothing like that. He's the greatest diplomat, greatest talker, which is very rare for the chapter, given what I've talked about before, and he's a great duelist, great swordsman. Now we come across the newest development, which hasn't actually been put into any short story. Mostly everything else I've talked about is in a draft of a short story or one of the two published short stories. But the two released short stories. What I'm about to say is very new in the sense that it hasn't been written into a draft or anything, but the actual lineage of the chapter has been tossed into question as of lately. For the last several thousand years, everyone has believed the High Slayer Guard are 100% without a doubt successors of the Imperial Fists, though now that's being tossed into question since, as Pedro Alessio investigated and found out, when Lucius Eulaine, if you remember, he's the one credited as being the founder of the chapter, the gene seed he was with, which was officially reported to be Imperial Fist gene seed, according to essentially hidden records, it was not Imperial Fist gene seed, or at least very unlikely to have been, and that was the gene seed used to create the chapter. Now, Pedro Alessio doesn't know for certain, 100%, that they're not successors of the Imperial Fists, and he doesn't know who they are successors of, if not the Imperial Fists, but he has a strong suspicion they are not successors of the Imperial Fists. So, he has gotten several highly trusted serfs of his to go out on a highly secret investigation. No one else in the Imperium knows about this, not even Gilliman. So, he hasn't told anyone else in the chapter, not even a center. It is just him and these highly trusted serfs of his. That is it. And with that, I believe we come on to the end of the High Slayer Guard's history. And I do have a few things to say as we close this out, so please stay with me while I say a few more things. If it's stuck with it this long, a few more minutes isn't gonna kill you, okay? Come on. Grow a pair of balls. First of all, I want to say thank you for sticking around this long. If you've done that, you've probably subscribed, but if you haven't, please do it. I know that it's kind of a trope that to hear someone do a call to action, but it's more, it doesn't really do anything. You know you're going to get it anyway because of the algorithm stuff. If you like the video, that's great. I would also like it if you subscribe because that does help me see that the channel is doing better. So if you've watched this far, at least consider it, please. And furthermore, if you liked what you heard here, check out the Discord that's in the description. There is an entire Discord and Reddit dedicated to this chapter, and you can upload art, you can talk about the lore, stuff that you don't like, ask questions. It's easier there because then I know you're not going to get falsely hidden, which happens a lot on this channel. It happens very often that people will have their comments hidden, and then I have to go to YouTube Studio, which I don't do that often. So if you have questions and you want me to answer them guaranteed, go to the Discord. I have to burp. And please ask questions, okay? It's great. I also upload stories there so you can see the short stories that I've referenced. You can read them in full. I do typically release them in parts on the subreddit, so you can also read them before they're fully done, in case you don't want to read the full thing all at once. And yeah, I'd love it if you would help. We also have Space Marine 2 stuff, so you don't need to get minis, you don't need to draw with your hand, you can just help. You can also get a better look at what the Marines actually look like. It's great. And can help build a community, because right now there's not many people. So, yeah, please consider it. That's about it. See ya.